Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph, and I missed y'all. You know, it's been a while, about a month since our last episode, and I just wanted to stop by and thank you all for listening. Thank you for engaging with the podcast. Thank you for engaging our content, sharing it, liking it. I really appreciate it. And, you know, we've been out for about a month. You know, school just got started. I switched universities. So I was at the University of South Carolina, and now I'm at Liberty University in Virginia. Happy to be here. It's a great place to be. And so trying to get going again, and we're back. And so we're going to kick things off with a 2-part episode series with Kibri Hutchison Everett. She is an environmental scientist. She's a community organizer. She's a researcher, small business owner, and she's from my hometown of Rock Hill, South Carolina. And so we're going to talk about the work she's doing, the things that she's trying to accomplish as an environmental scientist and environmental justice activist. And in the second part, we're going to talk about the trash pile. The trash pile is this neighborhood in Rock Hill where we're from, full of trash, abandoned, sacrificed. And we're going to talk about that area and what she's doing as a researcher and as a scholar and as a community organizer to help the trash pile be better. And so I'm glad you're here. It's good to be back. And so without any further ado, enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab podcast. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me. And on this episode, I have a very, very, very special guest with me. Her name is Kibri Hutchison Everett. Kibri, how are you doing today?
I am doing just fine, yes, on this nice sunny summer day.
Yes, it is a good day outside. I'm in Virginia right now. Where are you currently?
I'm currently actually in Charlotte, North Carolina. So
in Charlotte.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes.
So people listening may not know much about you. So can you tell them who you are, where you're from, what you do, what you love, why we're here?
Okay. Well, thanks, Leslie. It's so great to get reacquainted with you. Both of us grew up together, believe it or not, in the little city of Rock Hill, South Carolina. So I'm Kibri Everett. I'm an environmental scientist, and I've worked as an environmental scientist for over 20 years. And just to go back a little bit, when we were both in middle school at Roslyn Road Middle School in Rock Hill, I think it was my 6th grade science class where we had to do a project on rainforests. And that was kind of my first memory of really being interested and wanting to learn, everything I could about the planet. And so luckily by the time I got, applied to college and was getting ready to go to college, I knew, what I wanted to study. So I, graduated from high school and went off to NC State in Raleigh, and initially majored in geology, but then switched to a more broader environmental program. And so graduated from there and then went on to NCCU, North Carolina Central University in Durham, and got a master's in earth science with a concentration in GIS. And so while I was at NCCU in Durham, actually before I enrolled at NCCU, I ended up getting a job there at the university to work on a project called ERIC. And ERIC stood for Environmental Risk in Communities of Color. And this project was funded through an earmark from a former Congressman, David Price, who would earmark money specifically for NCCU to do this research. And so my colleague and I, we were going out to communities of color around Durham, collecting soil samples. And then we were analyzing those samples in the lab using gas chromatography and other analytical instrumentation. to try and characterize the degree to which communities of color in Durham were contaminated. And so that was kind of my first introduction into environmental justice. And at the time, maybe I didn't realize that it was environmental justice. It fell under that umbrella. But essentially, that's what it was. And that was back in 2004. So that was my first introduction into the EJ space, which is where I mainly work now. And so after my last semester of graduate school, I ended up getting a position at a large federal contractor in the Research Triangle Park area of North Carolina. And I worked there for almost 18 years in kind of a data analyst role. So doing a lot of data compilation, data analysis, mainly for environmental projects funded by EPA. Mainly the EPA Office of Water is mainly what I worked in. But with GIS, you can work with any kind of data. So I did analysis of non-environmental data like crime and health and economics. So you name it. So day in and day out for almost 20 years after leaving the communities and being out, in communities. I did that for a long time, but, I'd say, towards the end of my time there, I really wanted to, get out and be in community with people who weren't researchers, who weren't scientists. That's who who I was around all the time, day in and day out, and really be able to take, my, technical training and my passion for the planet and passion for people to more, work more directly to help them solve environmental problems in their communities. And also around this time is when the Biden-Harris administration came to office. And thanks to that administration and the executive orders that were signed, there was now, whereas before there hadn't been really any funding for the environmental justice work. So I mentioned this Congressman David Price. He earmarked this money, for NCCU to study this. But, given my role at this company, I kind of knew based on the contracts that the company was getting, kind of what EPA's goals were, because we had a lot of EPA contracts. And EJ, environmental justice, was not, there weren't contracts in that space until Biden-Harris came along. And at that point, the floodgates opened. So there was now interest in, helping communities. There was now interest in helping marginalized communities in particular. And there was now money available to do it mainly through the Justice 40 initiative. And so given, the availability of funding now, and my desire to get out and, be able to touch people and not be at a computer day in and day out, I decided to start my own company. To be able to work more closely with communities. And so in 2023, I started my own environmental consulting company. And initially, I was supporting multiple community-based organizations through a life cycle, basically, helping them apply for funding, writing proposals and grants for them. And then once they won the funding, actually helping them execute the work. Because a lot of these communities and nonprofits in general, for the most part, they don't have a lot of resources. They can't really afford to pay a scientist to be on their team. They may not have the background or even know how to, or don't have the time to even write a grant or proposal. And so that was kind of my role, was to assist them with getting the funding and executing the work to make their communities better. And so that is what I had been doing until the change in administration, for the most part.
Okay. And so your company, when you founded it, it was funded through these grants from the previous administration, the way that they had environmental justice grants set up. You were able to get that money and then start your company using it to help communities?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah. So, yes, most of my funding did, initially come through subcontracting roles, which the prime contracts were funded by agencies like EPA and USDA, for example. But also some of the nonprofits I ended up teaming up with, I would help them apply for grant funding. And then once they got the funding, I would kind of be on their team to help them execute the work that we proposed. to get that funding. So yeah, I'd say about probably, good 75, 80, maybe even 90% of the initial funding, yes, was as a result of the Justice 40 initiative and all the other large environmental justice related opportunities that came about through that previous administration.
And so the obvious question now is, how does that look with the current administration? Because obviously all those things were rolled back, all those things were dismantled. And because it was done through executive order with the Biden administration, it was pretty easy to just kind of say, no more. And so now that that's the case, how has that shifted, or how has that changed the way you've approached the work that you're currently doing through your company?
Yes, yes, it's been quite unfortunate and almost a nightmare type of scenario for those of us who work in the environmental justice space, not just in the funding or the lack of funding opportunities, but kind of the weaponization or the demonization of even the term environmental justice as if it's something something bad or negative, or even criminal. So yeah, it really is. Yeah, been really tough times for not just environmental justice, but the environmental climate movement. Collectively, or even science. As a whole, is really under attack. And so what we've been experiencing are a lot fewer opportunities. A lot more competition for the few opportunities that are available. And small businesses like mine who don't have large teams of people who can do business development or write proposals, it's even more challenging. And especially a new company like mine that doesn't have a lot of past performance to report, we find ourselves kind of at the bottom of the list for the few opportunities that are available. And so it does require us to pivot into other areas that are quote unquote, safe or not at the ire of this current administration as far as trying to tear it down. But yeah, there is still a lot of opportunities in the environmental space. What we're having to do is, not explicitly say something like environmental racism. I mean, that might, turn a lot of people off, even the term environmental justice, or even, historically marginalized. Their words now just crazy that there are words that are on, bad lists that can't even be used. I've even heard the term environment is even, in some cases, in climate can be cause red flags. And so, initially when I started this company, my target client was the federal government because the U.S. federal government is the largest spender in the world. And having worked for a large federal contractor, that was a space that I understood how to capture. And so now I'm looking at other more local and state, local and city government opportunities, which generally are smaller than federal opportunities. They're usually shorter term, and can be even more competitive, more people going after them. So yeah, there's a pivot in the client, looking at different clients. And even trying to get into other kind of non-community focused, work, but more, technical engineering type of work. Built environment, for example, is one area that is generally safe. Things like transit and transportation. We've been able to capture some work in that space. So those kinds of things, those infrastructure things, those are, not going to go away, especially in cities like Raleigh and Charlotte that continue to grow and expand. So we're moving into those kinds of areas. But whenever we have the opportunity to assist communities, we do. I do a lot of pro bono work also through my nonprofit as well. So assisting with grant writing on the side for a community group when an opportunity does present, or setting up air monitors in an underserved community that has some concern about the air quality in their community. We've done kind of that stuff for, on a pro bono basis. So yeah, our heart is still in the right place, but the funding sadly has moved or is no longer available in that space for the most part.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. And
Mhm.
that's what we're hearing from all across the country, right? I mean, a lot of people were very excited when they saw that
Mhm.
the previous administration was so determined to get resources and funding into these communities to help serve and build up the environments and protect people from hazards and contamination. And so to see it just taken away so abruptly, so quickly, and without any real justification. Let's just be honest. There's no scientific, no economic, not even a real political
Mhm.
reason for doing it. It's just,
Mhm.
I'm here. I can do what I want. I'm going to do it.
Mhm.
And it doesn't seem to be really any strategy behind
Right.
how we're going to protect
Mhm.
people now that these things have been taken away. And so I want to go back though, because we talked about just real, you kind of passed really quickly, but you talked about the terms and the terms kind of being no longer acceptable when you write proposals, when you talk about things,
Mhm.
environmental justice, environmental racism, people say environmental inequality, inequity. And so when we think about those
Mhm.
terms or how we think about these issues, first of all, I'm really glad that you're here because you work with communities directly. I stay in academia. I am in what they call the ivory towers. I don't get to really get onto the ground and understand what people are seeing and feeling and what these terms actually look like on the ground. And so I'm glad to have you on the podcast. How do you think about it as a community activist, as someone who is on the ground consulting community groups? How do you define these terms? What terms do you use, or how would you talk to people who you meet about what's going on in their communities? How would you engage them and talk about these things?
Yeah, well, I mean, from my perspective, I honestly, verbally, have not changed my language. I speak
Mm-hmm.
plainly, and I'm not afraid of of the backlash or the economic fallout that may happen. So, and really, I don't have to be afraid at this point because I know there's no opportunity for environmental justice at the federal level anymore. So I'm not going to be writing any proposals to the federal government for environmental justice. So when I go out into communities, I'm not changing. I'm still, speaking plainly. I'm not afraid to say environmental racism because that's what it is when you have, the powers that be, local governments, or even powerful industries come into, well, first they target these areas that are marginalized, that people are disengaged, they are, below the poverty line, what have you. um, that is racism. That is environmental
Mm-hmm.
racism by definition. So being targeted for those different economic or demographic variables, and then when they get there, these polluters, when they set up shop in these communities, um, they basically do whatever they want because they know that they have the power and the people
Mm-hmm.
don't. So I'm not afraid to point that out when I, in working, in communities, because that's what the people who live there already know. And, I don't want to try and sugarcoat anything because I know based on, where we grew up in Rock Hill, and what
Mm-hmm.
we've seen, this is reality. So it's no reason for me to like lose trust with the community by trying to, say something different from what they're experiencing in reality.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you walk into the
Mhm.
meeting. I'm happy to be here.
Mhm.
All of you living in this community are experiencing environmental racism as a result of what's
Right.
happening, and we want to try to address it. Environmental justice obviously is a term that kind of seeks to broaden the conversation because a lot of people, and it's unfortunate because two things
Mhm.
can be true, right? So you can have, on the one hand, the idea that certain communities are targeted. There's no question
Uh-huh.
about it. Black communities are targeted, brown communities are targeted, indigenous communities are targeted, low income communities are targeted. We know it for a fact. You call it out, be very direct. But what also happens
Mhm.
sometimes is people want to give the impression that we're providing preferential treatment or we're trying to
Mhm.
gain something additional for these communities
Right.
at the expense of others. When in reality, and
Mhm.
you know this because you've worked in all these communities, there are poor
Yeah.
white communities too. There
Mhm.
are RV parks and trailer homes and rural areas and
Mm-hmm.
farming communities that are also targeted
Mm-hmm.
by these
Yeah.
industries. Their workers aren't protected. The people
Mm-hmm.
are in just as bad of a situation as any other group. And so
Right.
I do like
Yeah.
the idea of having very frank, blunt, targeted conversations with
Mm-hmm.
the people that you're engaging with. Um,
Mm-hmm.
how has that
And I will
gone for
say,
you? Yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was going to say, yeah, speaking of, yeah, just trying to, the people who have been underserved, trying to bring them up to be equitable is, yeah, what we're trying to do, not at the expense of anyone else. But I wanted to say, too, with the whole Justice 40 initiative, and as you alluded to earlier, a lot of that money and funding was actually going to benefit not necessarily, black and brown, but rural white American towns.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually did an analysis here in the state of North Carolina to see where, I was specifically trying to find out, how much of the Justice 40 funding actually went to black businesses. And I couldn't find, that any of the Justice 40 money by the time the Biden Harris administration was over had gone to any black businesses here in this state.
Mm.
So really, all the billions of dollars, being taken away, it really does hurt. Not necessarily. I mean, environmentally, yes, it hurts. Black communities, but economically, I think white and rural areas probably are going to be missing out. Or being hurt even further.
See, and when you say that, I honestly don't know how to feel. You have to help me with this
Mm.
because,
Okay.
on the one hand, we were told and it was touted that these initiatives were put in place to lift up what we would call historically marginalized communities, which are, at least in America, primarily black and brown. So, there was, and I made a big fuss about this last year when the initiative went out, that they took the race and the ethnicity indicators out of their tool that they use to
Mm-hmm.
identify the communities. And they just went with, climate, they went with economics, they went with other major
Mm-hmm.
categories, left those out. I was very upset about that. And I said, hey, you can't do environmental justice without considering racial and ethnic factors. But the pushback was always, well, the same communities that are black and brown also deal with these other issues too. They'll see some money. It shouldn't be an
Mm.
issue. We don't want the initiative to be undermined by race and ethnicity because when you go to court, it might not pass the court's analysis and it might be taken away altogether. Okay,
Right.
fine. And so we went through with it. It passed. We celebrated. We had the, White House lawn signings and all the fun stuff. And I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
the money's coming to these places, to the people who need it the most. Your analysis is telling me it's not. Now I'm
Mm-hmm.
upset. But then I go back and now it's 2025 and they pull it away. And so it's like, well, wait a minute.
Right.
I still wanted people to get help. I just thought it was going to happen differently. Now you're taking the whole thing away. Now the people
Mm-hmm.
who actually need help aren't getting help either. They happen to be poor white rural residents, maybe
Mm-hmm.
farmers, maybe agricultural workers. But in any sense, they
Mm-hmm.
need help too. What are we doing? And so now my brain can't compute
Mm-hmm.
all the
I
different
know.
issues that are happening all at once. And so, how do you think about
Right.
this kind of stuff? Because I'm imagining you wanting to have those black businesses lifted up, and they weren't. But
Right.
you also don't want
Exactly.
the people who were suffering to suffer even more because you put the money away.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I will say the way EPA kind of rolled it out, at least the EPA. Now there are other USDA agencies. I'll talk about EPA because I'm most familiar with that agency. But even with USDA, I think the case is the same where it really was not black and brown people getting access to this money.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect, in large part, it wasn't. But with EPA, I mean, they, and again, being in the federal contracting space and small businesses and particularly black businesses, we've been advocating for a long time that the federal contracting space is set up for the big boys, the larger entities to be able to get the funding. And so we've been advocating for, breaking up some of these contracts and make them smaller so that, small businesses like mine, for example, who don't have like a lot of resources can compete. But what EPA did in the beginning, or up until everything was shut down, was they were putting out these large contracts. And so they went to large entities that could compete. But this year, January, is when like the smaller grants were about to be rolled out through the Grant Makers program, the Thriving Communities Grant Makers program. So, there were going to be, thousands of small grassroots organizations able to get access to finally to some of this Justice 40 funding. So it was, EPA, I wish they would have started with that as opposed to some of these, larger contracts. If they had started with the smaller grant makers funding, that would have reached more people faster. Not wait until the end of the administration to try and get that money out. And now it's all gone, taken away. But I do want to go back to the tool, because you mentioned the CJUST tool, the Climate Environmental Justice Screening Tool. Yes.
Yep.
And I want to mention that I'm a part of a collaborative. We're called the HBCU Environmental Justice Technical Collaborative. We're made up of various researchers, most of us geography backgrounds across the country who have HBCU connections, either professors at HBCUs or attended an HBCU. And I've only been a part of it for about a year, but Dr. Bullard, the father of environmental justice, reached out to the founders of this HBCU collaborative and was also making a fuss about race not being a part of that tool. And so Dr. Bullard contracted with this group that I'm a part of, and we developed another tool that does include race. And so luckily now, even though that, CJUST tool is gone, our tool, the tool that the HEJIT team is what we're called, created, is still available. And the HEJIT team also developed a second tool trying to track where this funding was going, or it, ended up going. And so they did a couple of case studies for a couple of states to see exactly, who was getting this Justice 40 funding. And so that, just another reason why we have to basically do things ourselves, own our own data, have data sovereignty in situations like this, which I would never have imagined that, databases and, data sets would be taken away. That was not something that I would have envisioned under this administration, but here we are. And so luckily, Dr. Bullard and the HEJIT team had that foresight to create, a replica of this tool, but include race in it. And so now that is still available.
Okay. And what's that tool called?
It's called well, there's two. I'm trying to think what the acronym is. I'll have to look it up because I don't want to say it incorrectly. But the other one is like a Justice 40, tracking tool. But the one that has the race in it, I think it's just the HBCU CJUST tool. I think that might be the name of it.
Okay.
But I'll make sure I get that to you.
Yeah, that's definitely, we'll get that and put it in the description of the episode. That's going to be an important tool, because I was wondering what we're going to do since, EJ Screen was just completely scrubbed. Everything on the EPA site is completely scrubbed of justice information. I'm not even sure if the social vulnerability index is still there or not for the CDC. I have to go back and look. But they've been scrubbing all the data because they don't even want to know what's happening in the country. And so does the HBCU tool cover the entire country?
I do believe it does. Yeah, I think it is nationwide.
Okay, perfect. So that might be something that we might use in our research now that the other tools have been taken away. Have you used it for any of your research? Like, how do you feel about the tools, usefulness and applicability?
Yeah, I haven't had to use the tool necessarily for anything that I've done. I think use the CJUST tool a couple of times for something. I think I was looking up energy burden data like last year. But I'm so old fashioned that the tool in my mind, these tools are view, even like EJ Screen and the SBI, they're viewer tools. So I'm old fashioned. I go and download the data myself and, do my own analysis in ArcGIS rather than kind of using a tool. But if I want something quick and a quick look at something, then I would go to those tools. But to do a deep analysis, I always found that I had to just go and get the data myself and and do the work.
Okay. And you can do that no matter what's going on because that data is always available.
Yeah, even though, I mean, I thought I heard that some of the census data was taken down momentarily, but I presume it's back up. But
Really?
so,
Oh my
yep, I did
goodness.
hear that early back in January, February. Yeah, census data.census.gov went down, and hopefully when it came back, it was still accurate.
Yeah, I mean, there's always something. There's always something.
I
So,
know.
I guess the bottom line for people listening, if you want detailed justice analysis dealing with the environment, call Kibri because she has the skills and she has the ability to dig deep no matter what's going on the surface with these indexes and all
Yeah,
these other tools. So call her and
yeah.
get that work done.
Okay,
We'll
yeah.
make sure they do that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, yeah. I mean, hopefully it's still out there. I had to hold my breath a couple of times where I needed some air data, and I was like, God, I hope this data is still here available.
So you mentioned we were talking about environmental justice and racism earlier, and you were talking about how, and you were kind
Mhm.
of just describing it for us, the governments and industries, and they make decisions and they do these kind of things. From your perspective, how exactly are these decisions being made? How is a large industry ending up in a predominantly black neighborhood? How is a
Mhm.
large data center finding its way to, for instance, North Charleston in South Carolina instead of the city of Charleston, which has a more diverse population? How is
Mhm.
that happening from your vantage point? Is it really just back room?
Mhm.
We don't see the deals, or do council members and mayors and governors have something going on? Is it really just about the money? They got the money and the land. Like,
Mhm.
how do you
Mhm.
understand these decisions being made?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think we might need to go back in history and think about where historically blacks have ended up, the land they've ended up on in a lot of cases. It's usually has been historically, undesirable land,
Mm-hmm.
especially in South Carolina, the swampland, or down the low country, land that floods. So less desirable land, which historically had low value. And so generation after generation, black people have lived in those spaces. Now, the tables are turned, and that land is now, because it's largely coastal, especially along the South Carolina coast, you know, there is desirable now. Desirable not only for recreation and vacationing, but also for industries. And so I think the answer to the question is that this undesirable land has less value, it's cheaper. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what these companies are looking for. They're looking for cheap land. And I was in a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and it was about data centers. And that's what they said, that these data centers are being sited in places where land is cheap. So, that's going to be rural areas in a lot of cases. And there are a lot of black people in rural America, because land is cheaper there. They're also going to states where there's a favorable regulatory climate, so they can get
Oh.
away with pollution.
Mm-hmm.
And people aren't gonna, they're just gonna get a slap on the wrist. They might get a small fine maybe, but they can get away with stuff. So again, that's going to be largely these southern states where there's not a lot of tough environmental regulation. You're not going to go to
Mm-hmm.
California and think you can get away with stuff that's happening in Memphis, for
Mm-hmm.
example. So those two things are you know reasons why these polluters are ending up in, let's say, black areas in particular, because land is cheap, it's in rural areas, the regulatory climate is favorable for them to set up there. And so they ended up, it comes down to the bottom line, it's cheaper for them to get started. They save money, fewer upfront costs associated with purchasing land. And so sadly, the people that generally live in those areas, yeah, are they're fewer in number, and disengaged, focused on other things. But there are plenty of environmental champions though in rural areas. So I don't want to discount that, because there are a lot of people who take charge and, speak up for their community when something, goes wrong and when polluters come into their areas and start, damaging the environment and public health.
Interesting. So, so we can't really vote our way out of it or replace leadership, because it sounds like the way that things are set up, it's able to be continued no matter who's in charge or who is responsible for governing those communities in those areas. So what can we do about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question because, money talks, and, a lot of these polluters are, especially as it relates to data centers, I mean, they're promising, a lot of investment, a lot of jobs, and they're getting a lot of tax incentives too.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, honestly, it is paid to play. I'm not deep into public policy. And so I often looked at California to see, how they kind of solve problems, especially on the environmental front. They kind of are the leaders in a lot of environmental policy. But here in the South, it's a different situation. And even by state, it's different, because South Carolina is definitely different from North Carolina as it relates to protecting the environment for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it really is, a tough question to answer, because it largely does come down to money. These companies promise jobs and they promise economic investment, but as we've seen in a lot of cases, they don't deliver on those jobs.
No, they
It may
don't.
take 10, 20 years before they do. And then they, damage and destroy ecosystems and then walk away, with the people living there having to suffer. So yeah, don't don't have a good answer for that, unfortunately.
No, I understand. It's a hard one. Everybody I see always ask the same question: what's the way out? What can we do to make things different? People have different ideas, different thoughts. Obviously, organizing is a big thing, and marching and bringing up the issue in meetings and demanding accountability, demanding stronger protection. It's hard. It's hard to work out here.
It is, yeah.
And so
It really
I
is,
completely
yeah.
get I completely
And
get
depending
it.
on what state you're in, yeah, it can be even harder depending on where you are.
Yeah. No, so let's talk about that then. So we are from South Carolina. We're from Rock Hill. For those of you who don't know, South Carolina is in the South. Rock Hill is on the border of North Carolina and South Carolina. I've started calling it South Charlotte because all the people who work in Charlotte want to live in Rock Hill because it's a little bit cheaper. And so thinking about the Carolinas, thinking about your work, what are some of the things that you've seen on the ground that are justice issues, in your opinion, that need to be confronted in some way? Just examples.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I should start with, North Carolina, Warren County specifically being the birthplace of the environmental justice movement. This was in the early to mid 80s, I think, where the state or some entity was attempting to dump PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, which, and Leslie, you probably can define what those are better than I can, but a contaminant, a major contaminant. I think they were trying to deposit them in a landfill there in the soil.
That's right.
And so that, and the people, the residents, stood up, and I think, we're trying to block the trucks with their bodies from coming in and dumping these PCBs in their community, a small community called Afton. And so that in the literature is what is coined or cited as the start of the environmental justice movement. And so, there's a lot of history, in the Carolinas in particular, a lot of injustices, environmental and otherwise, that have happened. That's, one of the most notable ones from the 80s. But, even to date, I mean, there's a large landfill in Sampson County, North Carolina, which is kind of the southeastern part of the state. And there are a lot of, injustices around the largest landfill in the state, being there, adjacent to, Black community, and is, causing so much so many nuisances, and who knows what it's doing to the water table and whatever else, the air, all the different domains. But yeah, so from east to west, north to south, in the Carolinas in particular, there are issues. Most recently, I've been working with a community in Dillon who is concerned about air quality. So the state came in and sprayed the roads in their neighborhood with something. And we've set up air monitors to collect, particulate matter readings to see, what the issue, or to characterize the issue, the air pollution issue, which is their concern. So yeah, there are countless examples, and yeah, sadly, they take years to fix. So from air and water, they down in the eastern part of the state, there are companies like Chemours that people in that area have been complaining about, the PFAS issue. Like I said, there's, you name it, it exists here somewhere in these states.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When I first started doing research as a professor at the University of South Carolina, my first thing was looking at landfills across the state. And so I was able to publish an article that showed where they were located and how the populations around landfills became increasingly non-white as you got closer to the landfills, and increasingly female-headed households were there as well. And so we could see all of those things happening. Published that, I think it was at the end of last year, maybe early this year. But there's definitely a lot of issues environmentally in South Carolina. And because it's such a diverse state, it's really interesting to see how rural communities are faring, Black communities, brown communities. We have a lot of range. And so you can see the differences.
Yeah.
And so,
and even,
yeah, go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah, and I want to mention the prison population too, which is a demographic that we often forget about. But there is a large, well, I think it's Kershaw or Sherrall.
It's Kershaw County. I think it's Kershaw County.
Or yeah, it's Kershaw. Yeah, Kershaw. Okay, yeah, yeah. The large gold mine that is right across the street from a prison. So I think it's the largest gold mine on the East Coast. Is there in Kershaw, and right across from a prison. I had a family member who was in that prison, and he talked about, and this was not too long ago, talked about the terrible taste in water that exists at the prison. And who knows what the air is like, but like if you look at an aerial image of that mine, that gold mine, you can see the scale of it, and I think that's another area to explore. Like, and there are some researchers who are looking at, these prisons are often located in areas that are surrounded by environmental injustices as well. So I don't want to forget about them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, you're right. Because I should have mentioned that before, because when I was talking about, vulnerable communities, I often think about race, think about ethnicity, think about income. But there are communities that are just marginalized just because of who they are. And I think the prison population is one of them, right? We believe these are the worst members of our society. And so we don't really care how they're treated. We don't care what they're experiencing. And so we're more than willing to build gold mines, landfills, huge power plants around them. No concern at all. Another vulnerable population are undocumented workers. Whether they're immigrants that have come over looking for work, whether people who have overstayed their visas, maybe it's children of people who came over. Because they're undocumented, we aren't concerned about their well-being. And so their work conditions, their living conditions are usually very, very horrid as a result. And so I appreciate the reminder, because all of these communities are important and they're meaningful, and we should protect them just as much as anybody else. It doesn't matter who they are.